Present except Manager Loftus. We definitely have a quorum. And the first item of business is approval of the agenda. Is there?
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. If any member of the public is here for something other than what's on the agenda, I would be happy to have you come forward at this time. Great. I skipped over that, so I wanted to make sure. On the consent agenda, we have approval of the March 14th board minutes, approval of the check registers, the general checking account, surety checking account, wire transfers, and 2 resolutions. 24-016 is authorizing electronic fund transfers for all district vendor payments, and 24-17 is authorizing the execution of an easement for Hennepin County Road 26 culvert replacement. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Hitchbody, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have 2 items for my report this evening. The first is that earlier this week, we have met with Representatives Long and Greenman. I attended remotely, it was that icy day, but Mr. Whisker, Ms. Mall, and Mr. Carlson were there to meet with them. Very positive, supportive conversations with those representatives. We also, at our last meeting, had a performance review for Mr. Whisker. The board rated his performance as excellent and granted a 6.74% increase in his salary, which is 3.5% cost of living and 3.24% merit increase, bringing his 2024 salary to $190,106.16. Let's see. Are there other? Did you want to report on Manager Olson?
Yeah, we had a citizen advisory meeting this past week, and it was very well attended, and we had a lot of input. We divided up, actually it was run by Becky and Maya, and they divided up the group into small groups, and we went through our plan structure, and they offered comments of things we might improve or things we might have missed, and it was a lot of good input, so we're taking that information back and then reassembling it for final publication. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other meetings or events managers want to report on? Note that the upcoming meetings and events are in the printed in our agenda, including the Metro Watersheds meeting April 16th, where Manager Olson is the liaison. And that's all. We'll move now to item 10.1, which is the public hearing and County Road 6 Pond retrofit public hearing. Call the public hearing to order and recognize Ms. Cermak.
All right, thank you, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight we have the public hearing for the County Road 6 Pond retrofit. This is part of our kind of standard process before the board formally considers ordering the project. Although the board did receive kind of a full feasibility briefing at committee 2 weeks ago, I do want to go into a fair amount of detail still tonight with the project background on how the County Road 6 Pond kind of came to be, what we learned through our feasibility study, and then we can open it up to the public comment period. All right, so the County Road 6 Pond is located within our Long Lake Creek Sub-Watershed. Quick orientation here, we do have kind of the 2 major tributaries draining from the north to the south. We have the Woolsfeld tributary on the left and the Holy Name tributary on the right that come together just ahead of our County Road 6 Pond, drain through the pond and then into Long Lake. And back in 1989, the district, with support from the MPCA, received Clean Water Partnership funds to pursue a diagnostic study and start characterizing why we were seeing declining water quality in Long Lake and help identify strategies that we should be targeting in the area. As a result of that work, we implemented a suite of 4 projects that we've kind of named our Long Lake improvement projects that were implemented throughout the 90s, one of which being the construction of a regional stormwater pond at the County Road 6 pond location. The pond itself sits just under 2.5 acres. It is considered a dual cell pond, so there is a shallow berm that does kind of connect those 2 strips of land there. The water drains in from the north, coming under County Road 6 into the pond, into the second cell, and then either draining through or overtopping the constructed sheet pile weir that's shown on the right. We do have an easement, and you can see here on the left that the pond does fully sit within that easement boundary. This easement boundary gives us the capability to perform maintenance, long-term maintenance to the pond, and also to conduct any modifications to the pond, like a retrofit. Fast forward 15 years or so, and we still have water quality issues that need addressing within the subwatershed. You can see the lakes highlighted in red here are currently impaired. In 2014, those lakes did have TMDLs established. Shortly after that, we started to see some partnership formation. The city of Orono, Long Lake, and Medina came together to form a partnership to address the impairments throughout the watershed. And we also saw the formation of the Long Lake Waters Group Association. In 2018, the district kind of solidified its role as the convener of this group and sought and pursued grant funding to conduct a diagnostic study throughout the subwatershed, kind of further identifying what the issues and drivers and strategies are in the watershed. The result of that work is our Long Lake Creek roadmap. In that roadmap, we have broken out the drainage area into 5 management units. Within each of those sections, we do call out what the natural resource issues are, what are the mechanisms driving the issues we're seeing, and what are the strategies we should be prioritizing and looking to identify unique to each one of these management units. Throughout the roadmap, we did evaluate 59 total project opportunities, with 34 being carried forward and recommended for implementation. 34 is a lot of projects, so to help kind of prioritize and categorize those projects, we've created 3 different project buckets. The first being regional stormwater treatment. The second, that we call landscape projects, really gets at more localized small-scale projects that can happen slowly over time and be kind of aligned with land use change or kind of opportunity-driven based off road creek construction, for example. And then lastly, addressing internal load through alum or rough fish management. Regional treatment has been called out as our top priority in the near term, just due to its cost-effective nature in treating a large area of stormwater runoff. And County Road 6 Pond was one of the projects that the roadmap identified. You can see here on the map just the power of regional stormwater treatment. Just over 3,700 acres drains through our pond. To help put in perspective the full drainage area of Long Lake, this is over 70% of the drainage area that comes into Long Lake. Further supporting the roadmap's identification of the project retrofit is our monitoring data that we've been collecting over previous years. Our pond sediment surveys have shown that the County Road 6 pond is under-accumulating and underperforming, so it's not collecting sediment as fast as we would have expected through design. And we haven't had to dredge that pond since it was constructed in '98. Secondly, we have been collecting water quality samples at the inlet and outlet of this pond, and we've seen that the pond is working. We're on average seeing about a 30% removal rate, but we're still seeing high particulate phosphorus both entering and still leaving the system. So that's cueing to us that there is probably an opportunity here to assess whether we can increase the pond's performance. So with those data points, that encourage us to explore feasibility and see if there is a cost-effective solution to improve the nutrients that this pond is able to remove. So we entered into feasibility in 2023 with Stantec. That scope of work included diving into the data we had collected, updated modeling, and then also determining what the retrofit alternatives would be, evaluating those, and coming up with cost estimates. Again, we were targeting projects that specifically addressed particulate phosphorus removal because that is what we were seeing through our monitoring data. In total, we started with about 14 concepts, narrowing that down to 6 that we wanted to carry forward for full analysis and cost development. This list kind of highlights what those 6 concepts are, 3 of which could be classified as a variation of a filter bench. So the most simplistic being a gravity filter bench, so relying on water to kind of gravity flow through the sand and filter it out, to the most complex, which is the real-time sensor option, and that gets at some more proactive pumping to draw down the pond. Secondly, we looked at 2 variations of a weir. This would be placed between those 2 strips of land there to further define the 2 cells of the pond. And then lastly, we evaluated an alum dosing station. Like we always do with feasibility, we want to make sure we're evaluating those project options across a wide variety of metrics. You can see the categories of metrics that we considered here. This is really to make sure that we're not thinking about this project too narrowly. We're not looking just for the cheapest project or the project that removes the most phosphorus. We really want to think about this holistically. So you can see the 6 project concepts on the left with all of the metrics we've evaluated on the top. Green, it represents more desirable outcomes, with red being less desirable. The gravity sand filter bench located in that top row did emerge as our most cost-effective solution. You'll notice that there are projects, our alum dosing station, that do remove more phosphorus than what the gravity filter bench is projected. But as you kind of scroll to the right of the chart and you start factoring in the upfront capital costs, our anticipation for long-term O&M costs, it is our most cost-effective solution. And we also know that there's value in kind of considering the complexities in terms of regulation and design complexities. And so kind of we're happy with where that sits for that. Really briefly, I did want to provide an overview of just how a gravity sand filter bench works, so members of the public can kind of understand how the pond will be changing with this proposed design. So currently we have this sheet pile weir constructed in the pond that's shown here on the left. And right now the pond slowly drains through low flow openings that we have in the weir. And it is of course able to overtop during high events. When we add in the filter bench, we will be plugging those low flow openings. And as the water raises, instead the water will be filtering vertically through the sand, and that vertical filtration through the sand is what's giving us that additional 30% phosphorus removal. So it's taking out the fine particulate that the pond itself alone is not removing. This kind of shows the approximate size and location that the filter bench is slotted to go. You can see it's still fully within our easement boundary, which is one of our kind of objectives through feasibility to explore. We are anticipating 48 to 67 pounds of phosphorus removal per year with the filter bench. And to put that in perspective briefly, that's giving us an additional up to 30% more removal than how the pond is functioning now. Total life cycle cost for the project put us at just under $1.3 million. Again, that's over that 30-year lifespan. 664 of that is upfront capital costs, so design and construction. And then our long-term O&M costs are factoring in a $200,000 replacement of that sand every 10 years. So doing that 3 times over the life cycle. We are expecting to need a little bit of annual maintenance, going out there spring and fall to primarily rake the sand. This is to prevent too much buildup of kind of sediment, and we want to discourage plant growth on top of the filter bench. I did mention that the gravity sand filter bench is one of the more simplistic options, with the pumped options being more complex. If we decide down the road that adding in a pumped system is deemed desirable, we want to make sure we're designing the base of the filter bench in a way that allows us to kind of add that additional retrofit in the future. And lastly, we have explored kind of the regulatory needs from this project, both through feasibility and with our permitting team. And to date, we haven't kind of forecasted any obstacles that we won't be able to pass through to get the permits acquired. Following the feasibility study, we continued to have conversations with Stantec and really discussed the earthen berm. So the earthen berm would be, again, going in between these two strips of land and kind of further defining the two cells of the pond. And what we explored is doing this berm in conjunction with the filter bench. We're actually greatly reducing the construction costs since things like dewatering and mobilization are going to be already taken care of with the cost of the bench. So we greatly reduced the projected cost from $206,000 down to $64,000 with no long-term maintenance needs. And it's also giving us an additional 4 to 6 pounds of removal. And in theory, we should see a little bit more settling in that first cell and improving the longevity that we're getting from the filter media. So our recommended strategy for this project is to advance both project concepts together to give us that stacked water quality benefit of 52 to 73 pounds of phosphorus removal per year. In total, for design and construction, that brings us to $728,000. And you can see the breakout between the berm and the filter bench noted there. All right, so pending public comment tonight and the board's consideration for ordering an RFP release, we would plan to be back to award a design contract in May with a bulk of the design occurring over the summer months. As a reminder, we would be bringing 60% back in front of the board for review, with 90% coming forward for board approval. For members of the public, we do offer, as part of our kind of established process, a public meeting in advance of 90%, which will be notified kind of in the same way via the postcards, where we can walk the public through where our designs have landed and bring that forward as part of the board's consideration. That would put us in shape to generate final plans and specifications and start the bid process this fall, award the construction contract, and ready to break ground, hopefully in the frozen months of January through winter 25. And lastly, as just part of our standard kind of ordering and public hearing process, we do like to seek a resolution of support from the city that the project is taking place. We presented to the city of Orono on March 11th and did receive a resolution of support for the broader Long Lake Creek Partnership and the County Road 6 project. Also, as part of our public hearing notification requirements, we have noticed this public hearing in the Star Tribune, provided email notice to our counties, municipalities, and partner agencies, and then this mailing postcard that you see here did go out to all residents within 1,000 feet of the pond. We have received a few kind of comments to date. I have gotten a few neighbor inquiries up on the west side of the pond. I'm really just generally curious about how the project is going to work, what they should expect to see, and when. Overall excited and really grateful that there's going to be this additional checkpoint prior to 90% to kind of learn more. We've also continued conversations with John Newell, who's the property owner in which we have the easement over. He was unable to attend tonight. He gets to winter in Palm Springs, so he wasn't back in town yet, but he did want to voice one concern around the maintenance road. So I've highlighted here that red dotted line shows where we have an existing kind of high ground maintenance kind of corridor that gives us access to dredge the pond if needed, and then gives us access all the way to the sheet pile weir. And so he wanted to voice, as part of the public hearing, his concern for how the filter bench configuration may be limiting our access to the full site. So we've committed to him that we will be exploring kind of all configurations of the filter bench and what that might mean for access and any alternative kind of access that we can maintain.
I'm just a little confused. It shows a filter north of the outlet. I would think that the filter would be in front of the outlet. Can you,
Yeah, I'm gonna hop up so I can point here. So, yeah, this is the sheet pile weir outlet. And without the filter bench here, it will drain through those low flow openings, kind of under normal water levels. It'll also overtop that weir under really high storms. So once the filter bench goes in, we're going to be plugging those holes, and instead water will be able to flow over. So we're expanding the pond footprint wider. Water will be flowing over, and then vertically there will be a drain tile pipe that runs down through the bench and will be exiting downstream of the weir. But the pond will still be able to overflow the weir as normal during
Thank you.
high events. All right, so I think, President White, I think with that, turn it back to you.
Thank you. At this point in the public hearing, if someone wishes to speak to the board to give input on this, we would be happy to recognize you. And the process would be to come forward to the microphone and state your name and your address and then make your statements. So I invite you to come forward if you wish. Okay. I will close the public hearing. We'll move to item 11.1.
All right.
Ordering.
Right, 11.1, we are now, the board is considering formal ordering of the County Road 6 pond retrofit, and also then authorizing the release of a design RFP. Since I've gone through both of kind of the background and feasibility report through the hearing, I don't have too much left for you. Really, I just want to focus on the RFP that's in the packet, what the key tasks are, what we're thinking for budget and timeline. So the 2024 project budget is currently set at $525,000. That was set prior to feasibility numbers being carried into the budget. We then finished feasibility, and you can see that number is $728,000. Reminder, that does include both design and construction, and is for that stacked concept, the berm and the filter. We did determine our design budget based off a percent of our anticipated construction costs. So the RFP design budget that's in the packet is listed as $112,000. The actual task work, we have 3 task areas. One is kind of our standard design phase process, 30, 60, 90%. Included in that also is a subtask for the consultant to support us in the permitting process. Task 2 would be developing the final plans and specifications, and then also supporting staff through the entire bid process. And then task 3, we've asked them to provide a cost estimate for construction oversight. However, we won't be contracting for that until we get into the construction bid period. We like to kind of finalize what exactly we're building, and then kind of renegotiate what that construction oversight is. So that $112,000 is just to cover task 1 and 2 of the RFP. The anticipated timeline, always subject to change, but we're ready to release the RFP tomorrow pending approval. We have a planned informational meeting on April 10th with proposals due April 22nd. Planning to conduct interviews May 6th and 7th with the thought that we'll be back in front of the board to award a design contract at the end of May. So with that, Resolution 24018, we are requesting that the board officially orders the County Road 6 pond retrofit project and authorizes staff to release the request for proposals.
Thank you, Ms. Cermak. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
I'll take a motion for Manager Olson and a second for Manager Miller. Questions or observations? Manager Miller?
I haven't got a question just specifically on this resolution, but this is a part of a whole proposal for Long Lake sub-watershed. And right now, we've got one other project that we're looking at. And when will that be coming?
President White, Manager Miller, I think you're referring to Holbrook Pond. So that's a new regional stormwater facility. Becky is leading that with Long Lake. We have received grant funds to pursue feasibility and some early design work. And so last week when I chatted with her, our status was we were still working with Long Lake to determine kind of how we want to do roles, who should be leading versus supporting. So it is in motion. We have funds. I'm just not quite sure on the exact timeline on when we'll get kicked off.
Okay, and then out of Long Lake, we did that major improvement on the old sewer facility. But we kind of abandoned the rest of the creek going into Tangiers Bay because there was a lot of problems with it. Is that in our future plans somewhere or another to look at that project in spite of the fact that it's very difficult and complex?
Yeah, President White, Manager Miller, I'll try to respond to that and if anyone has more detail. I know the drainage area from Long Lake to Tanager is one of our management units that we've called out in the roadmap. And within that, we have project areas identified. I can't speak to exactly
They're
where
still on the
exactly.
radar, okay.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
thank you.
Mr. Whisker?
I can just confirm that the past work that we studied, as Kaylee mentioned, south of Long Lake, is all integrated into the roadmap with identified projects and costs.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Just the information meetings you had, and there's only 10 days to get their bids in. Is that enough time for companies to really, get enough companies to really start bidding on a project like this?
So we would release the RFP tomorrow, giving them some time to digest the RFP, and we also have a window in there to submit some questions that they have around kind of scoping, and then round out their thoughts at the informational meeting. I think we've typically targeted around a 3 to 4 week.
Okay, I just read, I was thinking the information meeting, then you only had so many days, and I guess I forgot about tomorrow releasing it, so that was my fault. Yeah, so, okay. And then I got another strange question. We always talk about raking the sand. Do we hand rake that? Do we drag it like a softball field, or do we rototill it?
President White, Manager Maxwell, that's a great question. With talking with other kind of watershed districts that I know have some of these projects, I think it can be varied depending on the size that your filter bench ends up being and kind of the configuration. I think hand raking is definitely a feasible option for us versus investing in any large pieces of equipment, but that's something we'll have to evaluate a little further.
Manager Olson?
I've got a question for you, but I wanted to ask Chris one other question. If you look at a structure of a weir, call it a sheet pile weir or concrete weir, and you've got I call it a notch design, versus a weir that comes and then gradually, almost continuously forms a V. Are they considered equal by engineering, or is there a defined purpose for notch versus the smooth V?
President White, Manager Olson. Yes, it varies based on the use of the weir. So the notches usually are meant to hit certain elevations or rainfall events, so you have really clean breaks. Where you use more of a V-type weir, it's to have a gradual growth in that, and it's probably more of how you manage the flow downstream. So as engineers, it's just part of the menu to solve the world's water problems. Just like with this weir, it was really recommended, we put notches, like small little notches in that weir to help manage the low flow, knowing that we had a limited amount of water to be able to bounce up and down.
Right.
And then that's where you have a big, long weir to be able to have it flow. So it just playing with sheet piles.
Okay, thank you. And the iron filter, does it work for dissolved and particulate?
President White, Manager Olson. So just to clarify, right now we are proposing doing strictly sand in the filter bench, and that's because we've seen primarily particulate phosphorus coming through.
Okay.
However, if we start to see the ratio of that phosphorus shift over time to more dissolved, because say we implement a suite of roadmap projects, during one of those 10-year replacement cycles, we could replace it with a more kind of dynamic media, to address the dissolve.
Dissolved, thank you. And also, now that we have this separation of the small northern part of the pond and the southern part of the pond, intuitively, I would think that the sediment has a better chance of accumulating there quicker than in the lower pond. So that maintenance could be a lot simpler in the future by just dealing with the upper pond. Is that reality?
President White, Manager Olson, yes, we are kind of forecasting that that berm separation should help encourage more sediment to filter out in cell 1
Okay.
and kind of help manage if and when, how we would need to dredge it.
Thank you.
Manager Hejmati?
Yep. When you get to the 10-year cycle and you take out, is it sand, assuming that we still keep the same thing, is it just to physically remove the sand and replace it with fresh sand?
Yes, President White, Manager Hejmati. Yeah, we want to, slowly over time, we're going to see more fine silt and clay kind of build up in the sand and start to slow its ability to drain and
Okay.
filter more out. And so that 10 years is that kind of estimate on when we think it might be essentially clogged, and we'll want to replace it with fresh sand that's very permeable, that we can kind of get additional drainage.
All right, so when it starts getting clogged, then you know that it's time to change it, that's how you know. Okay, and then when you take the sand out, how do you get rid of it? And there's phosphorus in there. How is that disposed of?
President White, Manager Hejmati, that's a great question. I'm assuming we'd follow similar kind of processes that we've done for kind of general excavation at other project sites. I'm not sure if Mike has anything to add there just from experience, but.
Sure. Manager Hejmati, Madam Chair, it would depend on if there's any contamination concerns. There likely wouldn't be because it's going to be the particular, but we would first, of course, test the suitability. And then sand itself is quite desirable as a building material. So there would be a use for it outside of needing to necessarily landfill it somewhere. They could use it for subgrade or some other, there likely would be a construction contractor that would be interested in utilizing that material.
And the phosphorus in it would not affect what they do.
Right, because it wouldn't be used for a growing medium, but again, maybe there is an opportunity to spread it if there was someone that had a need to plant with it in a very defined area. So there's a variety of uses that it could be utilized for.
Yeah, I'm aware that sand and gravel is one of the largest mined materials in the country, so, yeah, okay.
Any other questions?
One quick one.
Yes.
Do we send out a progress report to the city of Orono and the residents around there to say, here's how it's progressing, or do we stay on top of that for the people around that area to know what's going on?
Yeah, President White, Manager Maxwell, as part of our kind of standard design process, we would be sending out that kind of public notification that we're entering the end of design. We've got a really good handle on what this is going to look like and what the construction process is going to look like. So that would be the opportunity to bring members of the public along. We've also, as people are kind of reaching out with inquiries, kind of asking them how they want to stay plugged in throughout the process. John Newell, for example, we will be keeping him much more apprised to progress throughout the whole project.
All right, just for everybody around there, and the city knows exactly the progress we're making, or we're running into difficulties, that everybody knows what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will be tracking how effective this is.
President White, Manager Hejmati, yes, as part of our kind of internal team, and what we want to make sure through design is that we are constructing it in a way that allows us to monitor it.
Okay.
So making sure that Brian's team can monitor the flow that's coming out of the filter bench and taking water quality samples of that. We don't specifically have it slotted right now to be monitored the summer, right after construction, but that'll be something we'll have to kind of stack up against some other project monitoring decisions.
Are we ready to vote? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Are there any inquiries, issues, or ideas that board members would like to be brought forward for potential committee discussion?
I left my list at home.
Oh, next time. It's great to have you back, by the way.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. Mr. Whisker, we'll take your report.
Thank you, President White, managers. A few notable notes this evening, and then it looks like we might be able to stay on track for a short meeting unless I get carried away. Last night, Manager Olson and I attended the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District meeting where we'd been asked by their executive director and I think it was their board secretary, who's a Minnetrista representative, to come and give an overview of the Watershed District's vision, mission, and strategy, as well as some of the work that we're undertaking. So that's what we did. We took through vision, mission, strategy. We covered our focal geography approach balanced with our land and water partnership program, which is an on-ramp into our capital improvement plan for some of the smaller communities or communities where we're not exclusively focused on convening and leading. So it was an opportunity to tick through some of our downstream work. While admittedly they're more focused on the lake, we used it as a chance to profile the Greenway and our move into Minneapolis. And then we stepped back upstream and profiled our Lake Minnetonka strategy, which revolves around some of the work in Long Lake or 6 Mile and soon to be Painter, where we're addressing the largest polluting tributaries into the lake, which is just a sort of fun data-driven anecdote. Those 3 tributaries alone constitute double the direct drainage area to the lake and about 280% of the phosphorus load from the direct drainage area into the lake. And no coincidence, all drain to the 3 big impaired bays on Minnetonka: Tanager, Jennings, and Halstead. So we then stepped through some of the project work in 6 Mile, in Long Lake Creek, and the potential for us to move into Painter Creek into a diagnostic and planning phase beginning in 2025. And then we rounded it out with the other prong of our strategy, moving away from high impact projects to focus on our big policy initiative, which is obviously climate action. And we profiled sort of the first pillar of understand and predict, talking about remote sensing, the predictive mode of operation for Grays Bay Dam, and the 2D model. And I think it went rather well. They seemed to appreciate the information. We got asked about governance and areas of potential intersect and partnership. And with the LMCD, they've been going through their own strategic planning, rebaselining, and focusing on their primary mission of docking, riparian rights, and public safety. And so really kind of use that as an opportunity to identify that's probably where the nexus is, where riparian rights and docking meet ecology, where we implement our dredging rule. And how can we do that most efficiently, guided by the joint policy statement that we have from way back in the day, in the 90s, that guides the DNR, the Watershed District, and the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District on how to manage docking, riparian rights, and dredging in a really coordinated fashion. We also got asked about carp management. I think the LMCD has received some requests from bay associations, the Harrison's Bay Association, other lake associations, members of the public around what they could be doing with carp. I think they've been dabbled a little bit in terms of what their role might be, and it was an opportunity for us to profile that we're stepping out of that work after 6 years of diagnostic and implementation with Brian and Jill's leadership to partner with Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, the Department of Natural Resources and Pollution Control Agency, to figure out some guidelines for where we might pursue that work in the future, where it's likely to be most effective and under what conditions. So I think it was a third, they were very complimentary about dam operations too, and the water level management. I think and it was also a shout out for the website. I think one of the board members really felt like the website does a great job of communicating what the lake level is, what the flow is coming out of the dam, the water that's coming into the lake, so that people understand the decision making that's going on around dam operations to balance upstream, downstream water levels. So I think those were the highlights. I might have missed something. Bill, if there's things that you remember from last night that you want to weigh in on?
Yeah, the interesting thing that I heard was that since all 14 cities around the lake are represented on that board, every bay and every little community has been able to communicate to their representative. And the idea that we have been working on some lakes and doing alum treatments and getting the water cleaned up, they were excited. They said, can we as a bay get out all that carp and then throw in some alum and solve the problem? And James was very patient in how he explained that we can't succeed at that unless we get the upstream influence to stop polluting the lake. So if you have an upstream that's solved, it's time to work on that lake and do an alum treatment. But if you've got pollutants coming into that bay, you can alum all you want, and next year you're going to have the same problem. So very patiently went through and said it's a step-by-step process, and we're doing all this approach to those 3 impaired bays so that once they get cleaned up, we can keep moving. And it's not a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, but there was a lot of enthusiasm to get my bay to be like that lake you're getting unimpaired. So the enthusiasm and the financial horsepower is there. It's just that it's not ready. So, and when it is, we will probably help them with that.
What is the timeline for janitors in Halsted, and what was the other one?
Jennings?
Jennings, Halsted, and Tanager.
Okay. Well, you know, if we, you know, we've got forward plans on all 3 creeks leading into them. What's the ultimate timeline for accomplishing those?
That's not a question I could answer tonight, but it's an amazing question. I think it's one of the things that we discussed last May when we went through with the board and did some strategic planning and visioning is how do we know when we're finished in a focal geography and when is it time to move on? And I think generally where we are is we're moving from upstream to downstream in 6 Mile Halsted. Pierce is in great shape and we have a project. Marsh is in great shape. Wasserman's on track to be delisted. We're moving downstream to Auburn Wetland and taking another big bite out of the apple for Auburn. Kaylee and the team are moving over to Turbid Lunston. And then we're considering the alum dosing facility. So I think generally where we've landed through that visioning is we'll know when we're done when all the water bodies are delisted, and it's taken 30, 40 years for them to get impaired. So
Okay.
it's reasonable to think it might take a bit longer to fix that problem.
Longer than 30 or 40 years?
I don't know. I'm not going to commit to a timeline. I feel like that'll show up in my performance review. I don't know you too well.
Taking notes and thinking.
Yeah. You know, Long Lake, we do have a program. In Painter, we actually don't. We've done work up there just like we have in Long Lake. But next year, I think you'll see in the 2025 budget dollars that are showing up to move us into diagnostic phase of that wetland-rich system that drains into Jennings. So I think through the budget and the work planning, we could talk more about the timeline for both I think we can put a firmer timeline on the projects than we can how quickly the lakes will respond and become delisted. It took us 8 years to see Wasserman for the first time in its monitored history reach state water quality standards.
There's also a comment by the marina owner on Tanager who said, your work up in fact, he recited the design of the sand blanket or the sand filter for the pond that we just discussed earlier. He knew all about it. So he's been reading the
He was at the
minutes.
Orono Council meeting.
Yeah, oh, he's at the Orinoco, there we go.
Yeah.
So he came armed with this information and he said to me, you've got to come and look at our bay right now. It's already a lot better than it was since you put in that treatment on the south side of the highway, which was the sewer ponds. He says, we now look down 2 feet and my boats don't come out in the fall so bad. He's talking about cleaning off their bottoms like they used to. So he was very happy with the results to date. Now, we're not going to be happy for a long time because of the amount of work we have to get done and knowing what the reality is in terms of the content in that bay, but results that he can visibly see were brought up by him to me last night.
Well, I'll move on. President White mentioned the briefings that we had down at the Capitol with Joel Carlson and Samantha and Sherry dialing in. It was kind of a winter weather day, but we made it work. And we met with Representative Greenman and Majority Leader Long, and we discussed the Minneapolis partnership. But first we framed the watershed strategy, how we're working in the upper watershed, which has significantly less hard cover than the creek watershed, to expand storage as well as how we've worked in the Greenway, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, and down into Edina, and our proposal, obviously, to move downstream. We talked about the partnership structure in Minneapolis, the first phase projects, and I think both were extremely supportive and receptive to the update. They've obviously tracked our work over time. They were both quite engaged in the issues that we navigated around the surface and groundwater issues for Lake Nokomis. It was promising to me, I think, that I think Representative Greenman more prominently asked if we were asking for funding and when we might be asking for funding. I think we were in a good position because we discussed that this first phase of projects are essentially fully funded by the local partners right now, and that once we built momentum, we would be in touch with them with plenty of lead time for second phase projects. So both are interested right now in just remaining up to speed, keeping the information flowing, and I think both seemed ready to engage at a project scale when we reach out and engage the community alongside the park board commissioners and council members. So those could be some fun community meetings if it's the Watershed District and some of our board members, commissioners, council members, and state reps. We'd have a really good showing for our first batch of projects. We did make the newspaper for, again, kind of all the right reasons, which is a good thing when you're in the strip, this Sunday. So following last year's front page article, which I keep pinned up on my cube for our work in the Greenway for Minnehaha Creek back in balance, our 15 years worth of work on the Greenway. This Sunday we made front page of the Minnesota section for the Minneapolis partnership, and I think I've sent that out to a couple board members. I'll send it out more officially, but it was a decent article, I thought. It profiled that the work is modeled after the award-winning 1991 Clean Water Partnership. It does make note of the Watershed District's limited ability to control the land in the watershed, but that the land is driving the water, and that underpins our partnership approach that's been on display in Hopkins, St. Louis Park, and Edina upstream. We got some good quotes in there from Commissioner Musich, who really was banging the drum that this is a water focus that's going to be carried forward in perpetuity. I think she described it rather than just a project focus. Councilmember Koski said our work upstream as the watershed has been amazing, and that she's really excited us to bring that program and target that work inside the city for even more positive impact and climate resilience. So I thought it turned out quite well. In terms of where we stand with the partnership, the agreement and timeline, the draft agreement has moved through the Minneapolis City Council. We've continued to be working through some final agreement issues with Park Board Legal. We had 3 issues. We're down to 1, so we're 66% of the way there. We're ironing out kind of the final bit of language, and I think we're on track for the Park Board to hear the final agreement, consider the final agreement on April 17th, which would put us here with Michael Schroeder and Angie Kraft on April 25th. And then that's pushing our steering committee out a little bit. We'll probably be thinking late June for that. And then finally, to wrap things up, we'll talk about the boardwalk. And I did provide a pretty detailed briefing at the last meeting regarding the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk and some of the construction issues that we're working to resolve with the contractor, our design team, City of St. Louis Park. I think what I heard, because I'd asked explicitly, is the board of managers said you're quite comfortable with these progress reports and don't need any special dedicated briefing or report at a board meeting. We covered at the last meeting that we've been setting 2-week milestones for the contractor to keep things focused and making progress, and I can report at this time that we had 11 categories of defective work. All 11 now have solutions proposed that have been conditionally accepted by our engineer, so that's kind of a milestone. They're conditionally accepted pending a field installation test, and as well pending any feedback that we get from the City of St. Louis Park. So we now are at a junction point where we can begin discussions with St. Louis Park building officials, and that is a conversation that they've encouraged us to have in sort of a pre-application process before we formally submit this engineering package that the contractor and their team have put together through the city's alternative materials process. The city's been pretty clear, once that information goes in, it'll be a minimum of 2 weeks for them to chew on it and return feedback, and it's likely that they'll have feedback. So in terms of where we sit right now, as we prepare the application in concert with the contractor into the first week in April, We're still on the same schedule that I mentioned last time, which is, I think, in a blue sky scenario, we'll be exiting the St. Louis Park process mid-May, and it often rains. So I think that's kind of our most optimistic schedule, is we're done with St. Louis Park permitting middle of May, and that would have then the contractor with the remainder of the year to get in and do the repairs. So that's the track that we're on, and that concludes the administrator's report.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Whisker? Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.